Why do people want others to live even if they're suffering? Life has a value to people. The reality is that some people will always value your life more than you. And sometimes don't read the room. Cancer patients that know their timeline often get guilt-tripped into carrying on and using all their time when some can't face that. It's a very personal thing. One I personally hate the built around. I've done hospice nursing for about 10 years and have witnessed at least 1,000 people pass. Most of it is fear. Fear of them being gone. Fear of being alone. Sometimes it is totally greed. I hated seeing someone kept alive for a check that the family received. That was so gross to me. I always thought it's about having quality of life rather than quantity. My mother is like this. While you're alive, she ain't the most caring person out there. If you start going south though, she manically starts trying to keep you alive. I know it sounds weird, but I saw it happening with both my grandparents and my father. I used to be negative about it, but now I realize it's a two-way street. On one hand, who lets a loved person die? On the other, you don't want to lose one of your closest people. Because as soon as a person dies, the pain passes from the sufferer to the carer, family, etc. Because, I miss them, or, I could have done better. People act to minimize their own pain. So they keep people alive even if they're in pain because it keeps the pain with the sufferer, rather than transferring it. My mother was like this. And 3 weeks ago completed suicide. Am so heartbroken, but Mom was sad for a long time and I feel somewhat at peace knowing she will no longer suffer. There are a lot of people who make millions from sick people in hospitals or nursing homes. And many people are scared of death and project that onto you. I'm not really scared of dying. Suffering and prolonged pain, sure. But not so much death. I thought I died once. And my final thought before it went black was, oh well. Here I go, but one of my parents are terrified of death. And projects that onto me with being really scared I will get sick. Can get tiresome. But I understand the mechanics of anxiety. Try to talk to them about it. But it does not seem to help. Because they're terrible egocentric people who think their views and feelings are the important ones and not the ones of the suffering. I would never want a loved one to suffer. I don't understand why we show mercy by euthanizing dogs and cats, but can't seem to figure out how to do that with people. I know some countries are making progress, but it's way too slow. So there's two sides of the coin here. On one hand, if you're suffering from a terminal illness and in massive pain, I can see and understand how ending the suffering could be a reasonable desire. However, most of the time when this discussion comes up, it's related to mental health, depression and anxiety. Your brain is stupid when you're suffering from depression. It is constantly trying to trick you. It doesn't let you see the light at the end of the tunnel. Despite the fact that it's always there. Even people who goes through repeat cycles of depression, like myself, can have problems understanding what's the point of going on when in the deep of it. And every single time, I'm glad I didn't end it afterwards. As the saying goes, it's a permanent fix to a temporary problem. There is no going back after a suicide. You rob your friends, family, and even yourself from a lot of future happiness. Despite what you might think, no one is going to be glad that you're gone. This is why it can never be acceptable to commit suicide based on depression. Because you simply aren't in a state of mind to even make a reasonable decision about it. Way too many people who attempts it immediately ends up regretting it. But depending on how you do it, there is no going back. BoJack Horseman's The View from Halfway Down is based on a real person who had these thoughts. Immediately upon jumping, every problem in the world suddenly became irrelevant. except for the one that he was no longer on top of the bridge he had just jumped from. Edit. To add a bit of digression on why you should never trust people who tells you that it's reasonable to commit suicide. These people are still alive. These are people whose worldview is that life is worthless to continue. Yet they haven't ended it themselves. So if they can't even convince themselves do it, why should they be in a position to tell you that it's okay? It should be more okay to die. I am this day and age. It's not an unfamiliar thing that happens. Basically everyone have been through the loss of someone. And if they're suffering and want to end the suffering, you stopping them would only be selfish. Unless, of course, they're overreacting. It makes sense, don't worry. I guess people have such a rigid, pro-life worldview that the idea that someone wants to die is unacceptable to them. They'd rather force the person to live than respect their wishes. It's not an easy right or wrong viewpoint either. Sometimes people that want to die end up changing their mind and go on to have very fulfilling lives. And sometimes they don't. We refer to this as euthanasia. And it's illegal in a lot of places. Selfishness. As a nurse, I've asked this question for years. It's so sad. 1. Because these people only care about their own views and opinions, not those of others. It's not a, you can't die because we all agree it's wrong, it's, you can't die because I decided it's wrong and what you think doesn't matter. Only what I think matters, and it's an absolute that everyone must live by at all times. 2. Because they aren't that person, so they don't actually know what life is like for them. They just think they do, but they don't. Of course it's easy to say you would do X or Y in a scenario when you're not the one who is in that scenario. Actually being in that scenario is a different story. 3. They think in absolutes X equals always good, Y equals always bad. 4. Because allowing someone to decide whether they want to keep on loving or not makes them uncomfortable, and they want THQT person around. So their decision isn't about what's best for that person, but rather what's best for themselves. Euthanasia and the right to choose to end one's life is a really uncomfortable topic to most, so most people just default to the "you must live at all costs" approach rather than consider that maybe it's not always the right choice depending on the circumstances. TLDR. Arrogance and selfishness trying to be passed off as morals. Those people are truly selfish and unpleasant. They know better than the person impacted, and their wants and feelings somehow have precedence. In my opinion, it is selfish not to let someone suffering die. It's their life. They do what they want with it. Selfishness. They are only thinking of themselves, trying to delay loss and emotional pain. They're selfish. It's an individual's right to choose. I am a Kiwi. We had a referendum recently to change the laws so euthanasia is legal. I fully intend to avail myself of them should things go downhill. In their grief, they're only thinking of themselves. For some reason, the welfare of the sufferer isn't primary, but I'll miss him, her. I know people that refuse to put their dog to sleep when it was clearly suffering because they loved her so much. Makes no sense to me. Because people are inherently selfish. They rather have you around for their sake than let you go for yours. As for the morality of it, I'm split, depending if it's physical pain and sickness or mental pain. Because if you have untreatable cancer or something similar, where the only thing they can do is to make the rest of your days less bad, then I'm all for euthanasia. If it's a mental thing, I think there are other things that should be tried first. I think there was a study conducted on suicide survivors who jumped off a bridge but survived. The vast majority regretted their decision the moment they jumped. Almost all of them wanted to live. I think that's because depression makes it seem like nothing will ever improve and that your life isn't worth living. But in reality, you're just dissatisfied with how your life is, not recognizing you can change that. You can literally turn your life around and start doing things differently, which effectively kills your old life, but replaces it with a new one instead.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.